In 2013, we didn't start with a flight engine. We started with a battleship.
When you're building a rocket engine from scratch, you don't worry about weight. You worry about survival. You build it thick and you build it heavy, and you pray it doesn't melt.
This was the Sarah V1. We called it the modular test motor. It was a beast of stainless steel, composite heat shielding, and graphite nozzle, held together by heavy clamp connections. It was designed to be taken apart in minutes so we could swap out melted parts and try again. It was perfect for the laboratory, versatile and robust, but for a flight mission, it was a dinosaur, too heavy to fly, too rigid to steer.
The Sarah platform is not just a rocket, it's a re-entry vehicle for the Brazilian space program. It needs a kick stage, a propulsive decelerator to break it out of orbit. That engine needs to be lightweight and compact, it needs to be restartable, and most importantly, it needs to be extremely reliable.
But the steel monsters had a fatal flaw: heat. Inside that chamber, the flame overcomes 3,000 Celsius. Without active cooling, the throat erodes instantly, the thrust drops, the efficiency vanishes. We realized that to bring Sarah home, we couldn't just improve the steel engine. We had to delete it. We needed a new heart, one that was grown, not built. But before, we had to build a prototype called Sarah V2.
The Sarah V2 engine used all the advantages of the first version and had a dramatically reduced weight. It allowed us to implement a thrust control system in the engine.
Before we could print a single gram of metal, we had to print thousands of pages of documents. In Brazil, advanced aerospace research isn't just an engineering challenge, it is a financial one.
To build a rocket in Brazil, you don't just fight gravity, you fight for resources. We knew exactly how to fix the engine, but high-end additive manufacturing is expensive. We needed partners who believed in the mission as much as we did. Moreover, we needed a team capable of handling this challenge. So we invited outstanding researchers with PhDs in aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, and material science to join the project. And along the way, many talented students also became part of our team.
The turning point came with the Uniespaço call from CNPq, but we didn't go it alone. We formed a consortium, SENAI. Joinville provided the industrial laser melting. The Brazilian Air Force provided institutional support. UNBTV documented the science. And internationally, we collaborated with Sapienza University in Rome and the Korea Aerospace University.
This wasn't just a university project anymore. It was a strategic alliance. We had the backing of the Brazilian Space Agency, Air Force, and the media, and the best laser labs in the country. When we won the grant, relief was instant, but then the panic set in. Now we actually have to build it.
To steer a capsule, you need to gimbal the engine. You cannot gimbal a 50-kilogram steel pipe. You need a featherweight heart. We had to transform the motor and print the gimbal mounts directly into the engine skin.
Welcome to the Chemical Propulsion Laboratory. It's Sarah V3. It's 2 pieces of Inconel 718, and it's 3D printed. And inside these walls, there are 64 cooling channels that actually shouldn't exist.
The Sarah re-entry vehicle requires precise control during the braking burn. We designed a thrust vector control system using 2 electromechanical linear actuators. They attach directly to the printed supports on the combustion chamber, allowing us to tilt the thrust vector by plus or minus 5 degrees in 2 perpendicular directions. This provides full pitch and yaw control without complex hydraulics. By switching to additive manufacturing, we didn't just gain control, we lost weight, and quite significantly. The first modular motor weighed 50 kilograms, and its optimized second version about 10 kilograms. The complete assembly of the Sarah V3, with integrated cooling and gimbal mounts, targets a dry mass of under 5 kilograms. This mass reduction is the only way to meet the mission Delta-V requirements.
The engine is also significantly smaller and closer to its flight version. It consists of only 2 parts, called the pre-chamber and the post-chamber, joined by a flange. Within this design, we are able to minimize internal stresses, making the engine stronger. As a result, the walls became remarkably thin. To put this into perspective, behind the wall, just of 1 mm thick, there is a pressure of over 30 atmospheres and a temperature exceeding 3000 Celsius. This is remarkable, especially considering that the engine still operates with high safety margins.
Hybrid motors have a natural defense, the fuel blowing effect. The evaporating paraffin pushes the flame away from the wall. But at the nozzle, the flow accelerates to Mach 1, and the boundary layer disappears. The protection vanishes. The heat flux skyrockets. In a steel engine, we used graphite inserts to survive this, but graphite is heavy and brittle. For a flight engine, we needed a metallic nozzle that could survive the fire indefinitely.
When we started preparing the project proposal, we held several meetings with our partner, the Senai Institute of Innovation in Laser Processing. One of the main topics of discussion was the choice of materials and manufacturing process. We evaluated different options to address the thermal balance challenges, the type of material, and the project budget. As a result, we decided that the superalloy Inconel 718 was the most suitable choice for this development. Between different technologies of the manufacturing, we chose the laser powder bed fusion as it could give the best resolution for the cooling channels fabrication.
In a standard liquid rocket, you feed the cold propellant into the hottest part, the nozzle. But if we do that with nitrous oxide, it boils instantly. Its critical temperature is only 36 degrees Celsius. If it touches a hot wall, a gas pocket forms, the flow stops, and the engine melts. This is the cooling paradox.
As for the hybrid rocket propellant, especially in a university project context, nitrous oxide is one of the best choices. It is a powerful oxidizer. You have probably seen it used as an additive in racing cars, where it helps boost the engine performance when used moderately as a gas in small quantities. In rocket engines, however, it's injected in large quantities and in the liquid state to enable combustion and thrust generation. Because it contains a large amount of oxygen in its composition and is a self-pressurizing liquid, it does not require pumps in the feeding line and naturally flows into the engine. However, this otherwise excellent propellant has one significant disadvantage. Similar to liquid oxygen, it can exist in liquid form only at relatively low temperatures, up to 36 Celsius. Therefore, thermal balance is essential for proper engine operation.
For the safety on the test stand, our engine uses water for cooling. By keeping the pressure over 40 bar, this path allows us to heat the oxidizer to 250 degrees Celsius without boiling. It defies convention to save the chemistry.
We had to think differently. We used the counterflow design. We inject the coolant at the top, the cold end. It travels down, picking up the heat, and exits at the nozzle. It's counterintuitive, but it keeps the fluid liquid. In such a way, the nitrous oxide in the injection chamber will remain cool and liquid.
This solution created a manufacturing nightmare. We needed 64 channels in the chamber wall to maximize surface area. But as the engine narrows to the throat, the circumference shrinks. There isn't enough space for 64 wide channels. If we just squeeze them, the flow would choke.
This was another problem to solve. As we can see, the engine throat is significantly smaller than the combustion chamber diameter. This is typical of engines with long burn times since the fuel is stored inside the chamber. In contrast, the throat is kept small because we aim to operate at high chamber pressure and achieve high specific impulse.
We had to maintain high velocity flow in the cooling channels to prevent boiling. So, we designed a hydraulic bifurcation. 64 channels in the chamber merge into 32. Then, as the nozzle tightens, 32 merge into 16. It is a biological design, like the branching of veins or arteries, optimized to keep the fluid moving at exactly the right speed.
As we move from the cylindrical chamber to the nozzle, the heat transfer spikes from approximately 1 MW per square meter to about 10 MW per square meter. This creates enormous thermal loads on the engine structure, and all of this heat must be absorbed through the tiny cooling channels in the wall. This is where all our knowledge in the numerical simulation will be applied.
At the throat, the hottest point of the engine, we had only 8 channels, but they are deep and narrow, optimized for maximum velocity. This keeps the Reynolds number high and the heat transfer coefficient at its peak, exactly where the fire is hottest.
It's a puzzle. You have to push the same amount of coolant through a smaller and smaller passage without restricting the flow. It's like designing a highway where the traffic must move faster as the road gets narrower. And then another problem arises. Can we manufacture the engine? Can we achieve sufficient manufacturing accuracy so that the cooling channels would work as planned? Will it actually work given that the heat transfer area is so small while the heat load is so large? This was probably the biggest moment of uncertainty in our project, so we have to check and recheck our design before starting any manufacturing.
Printing isn't magic, it has rules. We had to design every port, every flange to be self-supporting. Look at the sensor ports. They aren't round, they are teardrops. This shape maintains a 45-degree angle, allowing the printer to build the hole without filling it with support material that we could never remove.
To validate our design and demonstrate engine performance, we need to install a large number of sensors. Several types are used in the setup: pressure, temperature, force, and mass flow sensors. Since the main focus of the engine is regenerative cooling, we place thermocouples along the cooling path at the most critical points to access cooling performance inside the chamber and the nozzle.
However, 3D printing leaves a rough surface, like cast iron. To ensure a gas-tight seal for the injectors and sensors, we designed machining allowances, extra material printed on the flanges. After printing, we put the engine on a CNC lathe to shave these faces down to micron-level precision. It is a hybrid manufacturing strategy: printed complexity, machined accuracy.
The design that we will have to provide is so-called design for additive manufacturing, where the process of 3D printing has to be major concern. This is why classical design methods described in the literature will not work there. We have to plan how the structure will support itself while 3D printed. And also we have to take into account tolerances, possible deformation of the structure due to heat during manufacturing process. Since the motor walls are thin, precision planning on the preliminary design phase is extremely important.
The computer says it works, the math is perfect, but the printer is a different beast.
In the next episode, we will talk about the modern design methods used to create our engine, and also about manufacturing.